Right, gather round, because what I'm about to tell you is so spectacularly absurd that even a satirist couldn't have written it better. We've got a government minister who's managed to contradict not just his colleagues, not just his Chancellor, but himself within the space of 24 hours. And no, he wasn't suffering from amnesia or having an existential crisis. This is just British politics in 2026, where consistency is apparently optional and cabinet unity is a quaint relic from a bygone era. Quick favor, if you're loving this political pandemonium, smash that subscribe button. Over 94% of you haven't yet. It's free, takes literally a second, and helps us keep exposing these political gymnastics. Cheers if you did. Right, back to this absolute shambles. So, picture this scene. You're at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, that glamorous alpine gathering where the global elite sip champagne and pretend to solve world poverty. Enter Peter Kyle, Britain's Business and Trade Secretary, who apparently decided that what Labour's Brexit policy really needed was more confusion. In an interview with CNBC, Kyle declared that Britain would be crazy not to look at joining a customs union with the EU. He called for a gentle debate about the best opportunities for Britain's economy post-Brexit. Gentle debate. That's rich, considering Brexit nearly tore this country into two warring factions who couldn't agree on whether tea should be made with milk first or last, never mind our entire economic future. But here's where it gets properly bonkers. Just 24 hours earlier, this very same Peter Kyle had told the Financial Times that pursuing a customs union would be foolish and dismissed it as Lib Dem utopianism. Let me repeat that for those at the back. He called it foolish on Tuesday and crazy not to consider on Wednesday. That's not a policy evolution, that's a complete personality transplant. Either Kyle discovered some groundbreaking economic research overnight, or someone's had a rather stern word with him about keeping his options open. My money's on the latter. Now let's add another layer to this delicious political lasagna of chaos. Just one day before Kyle's Davos declarations, Chancellor Rachel Reeves had explicitly ruled out joining a customs union. The Chancellor, the person who controls the purse strings, the second most powerful person in government after the Prime Minister, she said no. Kyle then rocks up in Switzerland and says, well, maybe yes, actually. If this were a marriage, they'd be in counseling faster than you can say irreconcilable differences. The thing is, this isn't just ministerial freelancing or colourful debate. It strikes at the very heart of what Labour promised during the election campaign. Sir Keir Starmer set out what he called his red lines on Brexit, a set of non-negotiable positions that were supposed to reassure voters that Labour wasn't planning to reverse Brexit through the back door. Those red lines included no return to the single market, no return to free movement, and no customs union. These weren't suggestions or aspirational goals. They were meant to be the bedrock of Labour's Brexit position. Yet here we are, barely months into government, and ministers are publicly musing about whether those red lines might actually be more of a gentle pink suggestion. Let's talk about what Kyle actually said in Davos, because the details matter. He insisted that joining a customs union would be part of a longer-term process and helpfully reminded everyone that Turkey took 20 years to join the customs union and Britain 4 years to leave it. His argument seems to be that because it would take ages anyway, we might as well start the conversation now. That's a bit like saying, look, I know we agreed we wouldn't move house, but let me just start looking at property listings because buying a house takes ages anyway. It's technically not breaking your promise immediately, but it's certainly testing the boundaries. Kyle also claimed that Britain is now back together as a country, with stable government and a 10-year industrial strategy. Back together? Has he been to the same Britain I've been living in? Because last time I checked, we're still having furious arguments about Brexit at every family gathering, regional inequalities are as stark as ever, and the only thing most people can agree on is that the trains don't work properly. Saying we're back together because we have a stable government is like saying a couple has resolved all their issues because they've stopped shouting at each other in public. The underlying tensions are very much still there, just temporarily suppressed. But wait, there's more, because apparently Kyle isn't the only Labour minister who's feeling a bit wobbly on the customs union question. Deputy Prime Minister David Lammy and Health Secretary Wes Streeting have both hinted at their support for joining a customs union with Brussels. So we've got the Business Secretary flip-flopping faster than a pancake on Shrove Tuesday, the Chancellor saying absolutely not, and two other senior cabinet members dropping heavy hints that they're Team Customs Union. This isn't a cabinet, it's a debating society where nobody's quite sure what motion they're arguing for or against. The Lib Dems, naturally, are having an absolute field day with this. Their Europe spokesman, Al Pinkerton, delivered what might be the understatement of the year when he said Labour is all over the place on the customs union. All over the place? They're not just all over the place, they're in different postcodes, possibly different time zones. Pinkerton pointed out that Kyle had contradicted not just his cabinet colleagues, but himself within 24 hours. The Lib Dems have long advocated for rejoining a customs union, so watching Labour tie itself in knots over the issue must be like watching your rival football team score own goals repeatedly, while you sit in the stands eating crisps and thoroughly enjoying the show. Now let's step back and consider what this actually means for Britain's relationship with the European Union. A customs union, for those who need a refresher, would mean the UK adopting the EU's external tariff on goods coming from outside the bloc, and in return, goods could flow freely between the UK and EU without tariffs or most checks. The economic arguments for this are reasonably straightforward. It would reduce friction at borders, make life easier for businesses, and potentially boost trade. The arguments against are equally clear. It would limit Britain's ability to strike independent trade deals, one of the supposed benefits of Brexit, and would mean following EU trade rules. But here's the political minefield Labour has walked into. Brexit was supposed to be done and dusted. Boris Johnson won an 80-seat majority in 2019, partly on the promise to get Brexit done. The country had voted, the decision was made, and we were all supposed to move on with our lives. Yet here we are in 2026, still arguing about the fundamental architecture of our relationship with Europe. Every time a minister even whispers the words customs union, it reignites all those Brexit battles that tore communities and families apart. Kyle called it a gentle debate, but there's nothing gentle about Brexit debates in Britain. They're more like gladiatorial combat with statistics and GDP projections as weapons. What makes this situation particularly tricky for Starmer is that he's trying to perform a delicate balancing act. On one hand, he needs to reassure Leave voters, particularly in those red wall seats Labour recaptured, that he's not trying to reverse Brexit by stealth. On the other hand, the economic reality is that Brexit has created trade barriers and economic friction that many businesses find frustrating and costly. So Labour's position seems to be, we're definitely not rejoining the customs union, except we might want to have a gentle debate about it, but anyone who suggests we should is being foolish, unless they're making the point that it would be crazy not to consider it. Clear as mud, right? Kyle's comments about Turkey are particularly interesting. He noted that it took Turkey 20 years to join the customs union with the EU. That timeline is accurate, but it's also slightly misleading. Turkey's journey was complicated by numerous political factors, membership negotiations, and specific arrangements about their relationship with the EU. Britain, having recently been a full EU member, with all the institutional knowledge and existing trade infrastructure, wouldn't necessarily follow the same timeline. But Kyle's point seems to be that rejoining wouldn't be quick or simple, which is probably the one thing everyone can agree on. What's fascinating about this whole debacle is how it reveals the internal tensions within Labour about Brexit. During the opposition years, Starmer has been able to maintain discipline on this issue because, frankly, nobody really cared what the opposition thought about Brexit. But now they're in government, with ministers attending international forums and making trade policy, those private disagreements are becoming public contradictions. Some Labour MPs and ministers clearly believe that closer alignment with the EU, potentially including a customs union, is economically necessary. Others believe that reopening Brexit debates would be political suicide. And Starmer is stuck in the middle, trying to keep everyone happy while maintaining those red lines he drew during the election campaign. The timing of this chaos is also rather unfortunate for Labour. They're trying to convince the country that they have a coherent plan for economic growth, that they're the stable, competent alternative to years of Conservative chaos. But when your ministers are publicly contradicting each other and themselves on fundamental economic policy, that stability narrative takes rather a battering. It's hard to convince businesses to invest and plan for the long term when the government can't seem to decide whether it's open to a customs union or considers the idea foolish utopian thinking. Kyle's insistence that he's focusing on what it takes to get growth into the economy now is telling. He's trying to pivot away from the long-term customs union question to immediate growth measures. But that doesn't really work when you've just been asked directly about the customs union and said it would be crazy not to consider it. You can't simultaneously argue that something is worth considering and that you're not going to consider it because you're focused on other things. Well, you can, but people might reasonably point out that you're talking nonsense. There's also Kyle's claim that the Brexit debate ripped our country apart, but now we are back together as a country. This is the kind of optimistic political rhetoric that sounds lovely, but doesn't survive contact with reality. Brexit didn't just create a temporary disagreement that we've all since resolved with a nice cup of tea and a biscuit. It revealed and deepened fundamental divisions about Britain's place in the world, about immigration, sovereignty, economic priorities, and national identity.